Good morning. It's good to see everybody. I just got to thinking a few days ago after I had this totally completed that I didn't put a Happy Father's Day slide up here. So Happy Father's Day, fathers. I'll just tell you right off the bat, I was so into figuring out wrapping up follow that I totally spaced the idea that it was Father's Day. And as dads, I guess you do that because you're not the one having to go buy stuff, right? But anyway, so this is not a Father's Day sermon, but it is. It is. Because I'll tell you this, dads, I'll tell you this, moms, this applies to everybody. The best thing you can do to be the best dad you can be, to be the best father you can be, to be the best husband you can be, the best son you can be, the best daughter you can be, wife, whatever. To be the best person you can be is to follow Jesus. Very best thing you can do. And there's nothing else I could tell you today that would trump the idea that the best thing you can do to be the best dad you can be is to be a committed follower of Jesus Christ. You do that right, and the rest of it will fall into place. So if you remember, we've been kind of looking at this idea of what does it really mean to be a follower of Jesus? Because it's a whole lot more than simply making a declaration, I'm a Christian. There's a whole lot of people in the world today, especially in our country today, who will say, yeah, I'm a Christian. But then do they really follow Jesus? And more importantly, is not what they're doing out there, but more importantly, when we say we're a Christian, are we really following Jesus? Because at the bottom line of it all, it's got to hit home here. I've got to answer that question for myself. Am I really a follower of Jesus? And if you remember last week, as we started wrapping this up, there were two main character traits or two main attitudes, two main things about Jesus that kind of informed all of the others. If you remember, we started talking about how we need to imitate Jesus in all that we do. And one of the things that we see from Jesus is his love for others. All throughout the Gospels, we see his love for God with all his heart, with all his mind, with all his soul, with all his strength. We just sang it, okay? We see his love for people. We see his compassion. We see his empathy. We see how he cared about people, ultimately culminating in the cross, in an expression of ultimate love. But we'll get into that. So as we seek to follow Jesus, one of the things that we have to imitate, not only was last week his big faith, and dads, I'd encourage you this, model a big faith in a big God to your family. Okay? Model that for them. Show them that you have faith in a big God, a big faith in a big God. Okay? But in addition to that, we imitate Jesus by loving like Jesus loved. And we hear that, and as members of the church, people who have been in here, and we've heard lesson after lesson after lesson, and you hear someone say, well, Jesus loved, and we kind of go, yeah, we know. And we say, well, Jesus loved God. Yeah, we know. But then we have to ask ourselves, do we really know what that means? Because in our culture today, that very word love has been redefined. And it's got a different meaning. And I think all too often we gravitate towards that meaning. And our understanding and our definition of love is influenced then by our culture. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it can be if we understand love wrong, and love is what we're supposed to be imitating. If you've got your Bibles, let's go to Matthew chapter 22. Jesus is often asked his understanding of the law. Matthew chapter 22, we get the scene from which the song we just sang comes from. Starting in verse 34. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Jesus, this lawyer, this Pharisee comes to Jesus and he wants to test him. And we saw from the very beginning of our study about follow, that was very common for rabbis to be asked questions about their interpretation of law. And so this one comes and says, okay, and they had debated this from the beginning. Which is the biggie? And we kind of have that tendency sometimes too, don't we? What's the biggest, what's the one thing that I got to get right? And so they come to him and they say, what's the great commandment? And Jesus takes them back to a place that they would understand. Deuteronomy chapter 6. All right? He takes them back to a place where God is informing Israel of his love for him and what he expects. And he's informing Israel of how he's going to relate to them. Okay? And this passage out of Deuteronomy 6 becomes something that will be recited and repeated by these Jews from the time it was written until now. And in it, God talks of his love for Israel even before Israel was Israel. And this is so important for us to grasp in this. God loved Israel before Israel was even a nation, because it was part of his plan. And he had already predetermined that Israel was going to be his chosen people for a specific plan. And then God not only shows Israel that he loves them, he demonstrates that love throughout Israel's existence. We see God coming in and rescuing Israel from the horrid slavery that they were in Egypt. And he delivers them from Pharaoh. And then God leads them and escorts them all the way to the promised land, and he provides for them along the way. And he takes them to a land eventually as they go in that's flowing with milk and honey and has everything they need. And then he goes on and he promises Israel that I'm not only going to bless you now, I'm going to bless you into future generations. And understand, we today are recipients of the blessing of Israel that have come through the fruition through Jesus Christ. Okay? And God says, I love you so much, and I love you, and I love you, and I loved you first before you even knew who I was. I loved you. And all I expect in return is for you to demonstrate your love towards me by keeping the covenant we establish. Okay? Now, flash forward 1,400 years. Jesus is on the scene, and his message to the people of that day is right there. God is still seeking the wholehearted love of his people. And that's true today. And responding to his love should be our highest priority. Okay? Keep that in mind. As we seek to follow Jesus and love as he loved God with all his heart, mind, soul, and strength. We too should love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. It should be our number one priority, right? But here's the problem. We hear that and we understand that, but it begs a question. What is love? What does it really mean? I mean, it gets thrown around so much. You love your spouse. You love your kids. You love French fries. Right? You don't like French fries? Oh, man. I love French fries. Put some chili on it and some cheese on it and some jalapeno. I'm getting hungry already. Right? But does that mean I love French fries as much as I love my kids? No. But we got one word. We throw it out there, right? So what does it actually mean? If you were to go ask the writers at Hallmark Channel to define love, and I know I pick on Hallmark a lot, don't I? I do. I just do. But if you were going to ask them, to define love, I guarantee you there would be one word in there that would be common, and that word is feeling. Okay? And chances are, if I ask you right now to define love, at some point in time in your definition, you would write something about how you feel. Okay? Now, some of you are going, where's he going with this? Dana always teases me, okay, because I'm a Trekkie. For those of you that don't know what a Trekkie is, that's somebody who likes Star Trek. The old Star Trek. I like the new Star Trek, but the old Star Trek's the best. And my favorite character of all times, okay, is Spock. I practiced this for years as a kid, until that's the Vulcan salute, if you didn't know that. Y'all are getting a big education this morning. But she teases me because she says, you just want to be like Spock. I'm like, yeah. Okay. Well, if you don't understand who Spock is from Vulcan, and the Vulcans have taken a vow to totally take emotion and feeling out of their existence, and their existence is based purely on logic, and that's it. Okay. Now, I'm not for an instance advocating a definition of love that is completely devoid of feeling. Okay. I was tempted to wear I have Spock socks. The guys have seen them, all right? I was tempted to wear my Spock socks just to show them off. They actually have little ears that come off the sides of my... I thought that's too much, okay? But my point is simply this. In our world, in our society today, our definition of love gravitates totally towards feeling. But when Jesus uses that word love, and when he models that word love for us, yeah, feeling's a part of it, but it doesn't go to the heart of the matter. It doesn't go to the very essence of what love is, especially that word agape, okay? That word agape, we throw it around a lot as the pinnacle of love. It is the godlike love. It is the love that God has for us and that God expects us to have for others. And yes, feeling is involved, but it's not the heart of the matter, okay? Because the heart of the matter is a total surrender. The heart of agape is when I surrender myself totally to the one who loved me first. And this is important to remember. God loved you first. Before you decided to become a Christian, before you even knew what a Christian meant, before you even considered about following Christ, before you even knew a word out of this Bible, God loved you. And He loved you first. And so love, agape love, is a surrender to the one who totally loves us first. To surrender ourselves completely to Him. To be devoted to Him, like we talked a few weeks ago. That undivided devotion. It is you and you alone first and foremost in my life. And when you think about it, God comes to us and He basically says, listen, I loved you first. And I love you still. And so this idea, we throw that word command around a lot, but this is more of an appeal. This is more of God begging, God saying, I loved you, so love me back. Okay? It's like when a man and a woman, a man comes and he decides she's the one, right? And he gets down on one knee or whatever. They still do that? I did, funny story. I may not do this at the 11, so this one's videotaped, right? Oh well. So the night I proposed to Dana, we're supposed to go out and eat dinner with her two sisters and brothers-in-law. And we're in the living room of my house, and I wanted to propose before we went to dinner so she could show off the ring. And so she's in the living room, and she's turned around, so I come up behind her, and I get down on one knee, and I pull the ring out, and she just turns around and says, would you get up off the floor? We have got to go. We're going to be late for dinner. And she just turns back around, takes about 2 steps, and then realizes that I'm sitting there on the floor with the ring, and then the waterworks and everything come out. But anyway, my point is simply this. When you get to that point in time in a relationship, when you decide he's the one or she's the one, and you come and being on a knee with a ring is an appeal. It's saying, I love you so much, come be with me forever. And that acceptance of that ring is a surrender of sorts. It's saying yes. By saying yes, that's saying I'll be fully devoted to you. And in a sense, God comes to us on one knee and says, I love you and I have loved you from the beginning and I want you to love me too. Will you surrender and devote yourself to me? That's the heart of all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. So, and Jesus modeled that kind of love for us towards God. But I know sometimes we think of this and we think, I get that, but God's there and I'm here, and to be completely, totally devoted to somebody, I don't know if I can do that. Well, and I would say that on your own, you're right, you can't. Because it's just not natural for us. Go to Romans chapter 5 in your Bibles. Romans chapter 5, Paul tells us this: God's love, the kind of love that God has for us, has been poured into our hearts. How? Through the Holy Spirit that He has given to us. It's just like we talked a few weeks ago. You can't crucify yourself, right? By yourself. You need help. We can't love God as we should by ourselves, so God gives us what we need through the Spirit to love Him as we should. And you see how this works. As we daily go through life and we're reminded of God's love for us and His immense love for us and how He loved us first. And then we're reminded how God gave His only Son to redeem us. And when we fix our minds on that and we come around the table like we did this morning and we're reminded of that sacrifice, then the Spirit through us, through His Word, through others, reminds us of God's love. And that helps us grow in our love. And in our walk with Christ, we grow each and every day. And I hope we're growing in love for Him and appreciation for Him, for all that He does, even in the midst of something like this pandemic. But a few months ago, we actually talked about this. Part of the problem with our definition, again, we go back to a feeling definition, and it totally disregards what the biblical text says love is. We talked about this, maybe it was back in January, I can't remember. But in actuality, part of the definition of love is obedience. Now, we don't like that. It doesn't sound very romantic. And we equate love with romance. But understand, Jesus equates love with obedience. Look at John chapter 14. Jesus Himself says, if you love me, you will what? Keep my commandments. Okay? He says it the same way in 1 John 5:3. He says this: for this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments. And His commandments are not burdensome. Okay? The Bible tells us the acid test for love, the purest form of test for love, is whether or not we obey or not. Okay? And again, that doesn't sound very romantic, but the fact is, if you say you love God and you don't obey God, something's wrong. Something's wrong. Okay? Now understand, obedience has been touted by many in religious circles, okay, as being a form of legalism. Okay, and people who tout obedience as love will often say, well, that's just being legalistic. Well, if they understood it in its full context, they would know it's exactly the opposite of what they're saying. And let me explain why. Okay? When we obey God out of love, in response to God who loved us first, okay? And remember, you can't forget that fact. You cannot forget. If you forget the fact that God loved you first, your obedience will turn into legalism. Okay? Because here's what legalism is. Legalism is an attempt to get God to love us. In other words, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this, and I have to do this, and then God will love me. That's legalism. And the Pharisees were masters at it. They were masters at it. Matter of fact, they had list after list after list after list of things you had to do in order to gain God's favor. That's why I said from the beginning, God loved us when? First. Before you ever even considered obeying God, He loved you. And understand this, because God is whole and God is complete, God cannot love you less than He already did. God's love for you is full, and there's nothing you can do to make God love you more. So obedience is not an attempt to get God to like us or love us more than He already does. Obedience is a result of God already loving us. It's a result of God's grace. Because listen, I'll just be honest, there is absolutely nothing about this guy right here that God would look at and go, I need to love him. Except for the fact that I am His image, His creation. But there's parts about me that God looks at He doesn't like. Okay? And it's only because of God's grace and because of God's mercy that He chooses to love me. And He chose to love me before I ever got right, so to speak. So my obedience is actually a response to grace. It's a response to what God blesses me with. While we were enemies, Christ died. Okay? Don't forget about that. All right? So we get this model of love from Jesus. This model of how He loved God. And the first part of that great command, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. I hope you're getting your head wrapped around that and what that involves in your life. And you're asking that question, or am I loving God fully? Have I totally surrendered, totally devoted myself to Him? All right? But let's jump on the second half, because Jesus doesn't give this guy one answer, He gives him two. The great command, yeah, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is liking it, what? Love your neighbor as yourself. This comes straight out of Leviticus 19, out of the old law. Okay? Jesus basically quotes from Leviticus 19. He says, you shall love the neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Right? And so right off the bat, even in the law, when it was given to Israel, God is informing Israel about how He wants them to interact with others as He interacts with others. Okay? Now, Jesus, flash forward, again, 1,400 years, flash forward to Matthew chapter 7, the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus kind of encapsulates this love your neighbor part in what we now call the golden rule. Okay? Matthew 7:12. So whatever you do, or whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Right? And we learned this growing up. What's the golden rule? Do unto others before they do it to you. You caught it, right? That's not it. Okay? Now, that's it in our society. Or do to others just like they did to you. That's probably more like it, right? Do to others as they've done to you. Reciprocate their feelings. No, Jesus doesn't say that either. What does He say? Whatever you wish for others to do to you, do to them. How you want to be treated, treat others. You want to be treated rudely? Treat people rudely. Okay? Now, when you think about this, in the context of love, it is immensely freeing and it's immensely liberating. And here's why. Jesus gives us this summation of love your neighbor. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. Understand, this is completely devoid of how you feel about them. It can be completely devoid of how you feel about them. It can take feeling almost completely out of the picture. Not trying to be Spock again. Okay? But understand, in our culture, what we want to do is we want to treat others as they've treated us. But that's not the definition of love that Jesus gives us. He says you're going to treat people the way you want to be treated. And I don't care how they feel about you. And that phrase agape, that kind of love is a love that seeks the good of others. It seeks the blessing of others. It seeks to do them good. All right? And no matter how people treat us, we can still treat them good. And I'm going to clue you in on something here this morning. Okay? It may not be possible for you to enjoy a close emotional bond with everybody. It just may not be possible. There are some people, confession time, there are some people that just really get on my nerves. Anybody relate to that? You know? There's just some people, and it's like there's some people that, I just really don't want to go to dinner with them. I just really don't want to. Let me ask you this. Let's be really honest here. How many of you, with the advent of cell phones and technologies, right? You kids cannot relate to a time when the phone would ring and you would have to pick it up not knowing who was on the other end. Y'all know what I'm talking about, don't you? How many of you, as soon as they announced caller ID, ran out and said, I got to have that? Right? Now it's automatic. Your phone rings and you look and you see who it is. How many of you have picked up your phone, looked and see who it was, and then set it right back down and kept right on going? Okay, I see lots of honest people out there. Why? Because understand, we're human. We're not going to be emotionally close to everybody. But understand this: if God's command to love my neighbor, involves this feeling idea, then I'm going to feel guilty an awful lot because there's a lot of people, some people out there that I just don't feel warm and fuzzy about all the time. But understand, when he says treat others as you want to be treated, I can do that devoid of feeling. I don't have to be close. I don't have to be emotionally connected. I don't have to feel all warm and fuzzy. But I can seek their good, and I can seek to bless them. I can seek blessings in their life. That's what agape means. So he comes along and he basically frees us up to love everybody. Even those people we don't like, but we'll get to enemies here in a little bit. Okay? Think about this. Jesus has said, love your neighbor as yourself. And there's this scene that kept coming into my head this week. I talked to the boys about this. How many of you dads out there have ever changed a diaper? Okay. How many of you have ever just go, oh, goody, she's dirty again? Anybody? Oh, come on, Scott. Anybody just love changing diapers? Oh, man. Ugh. And see, the problem is, when they're first born, they're little bitty, and they got that little bitty poop, and it's cute, and then they get on real food, and then it's like, oh, I'm going to throw up, right? You don't feel like it. You certainly don't feel all warm and fuzzy about it unless you're nauseated, okay? But you do it. Why? Because you're seeking their good. You're seeking what's best for them. We see Jesus as a model, an example of love for others, and I see him on the cross. I see him at the foot of the cross, and I see a Roman soldier standing at his feet, driving a nail through his legs into a wooden cross. And I don't see Jesus at that point going, oh, just come here, let me give you a hug. I don't see him emotionally connected to that soldier, okay? But what I see him doing is acting out agape in his actions. Father, forgive them. And then giving his life for them. You see, agape is volitional. It's an act of our will. It's something we choose to do. It's not relegated to that warm and fuzzy feeling. All right? One more example, and the lesson's yours. Let's go to Matthew chapter 5. We'd be remiss if we didn't look at this. Jesus modeled a love for God, bar none. He modeled a love for neighbor, love for others. But then in the Sermon on the Mount, he gives us another standard of love. All right? Picking it up in verse 43. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and he sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. You know, we tend to think in our own minds, you know, I love my family, I love my neighbors, I love the folks at church. There's so many people I love, so I must be a loving person. And Jesus comes along and says that may be the case, but that's not enough. That's not enough. Matter of fact, he says, you know what, you're doing what everybody else does. Even the Gentiles do that. Even the tax collectors love those who love them. He said, I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm going to tell you, you have got to love those who hate you. You got to love them all. And in this passage, he reminds us of the fact that God loved us while we were enemies of his. That he sends rain, much needed rain, on the unjust as much as he does on the just. He sends sunshine on the just as well as the unjust. Why? Because he loved them all first. And he calls us to that same kind of love, to remember that God loved us first. And as we respond to please him in our obedience, we love others in that same way. Does that mean we agree with what they're doing? No. Does that mean we agree with their political stance or their ideological stance or their actions? No, it doesn't. But it does mean we can seek their good. We can seek their blessing. We can seek what's best. We can demonstrate agape to them and at them. You don't have to feel it in order to do it. And that's where our worldly definition of love has got us so skewed, it's got us so messed up because I don't feel like it. Well, you don't have to feel like it to do it. Will we do it? The question for us today is, will we imitate Jesus in how we love others, how we love God, how we love others, how we love our enemies? You know, when you come to the end of this whole thing, we have to ask ourselves, will we truly follow Jesus and love like Jesus in all circumstances? Even in those ones that yeah, on an emotional level, I might find it difficult to love you, but on a practical level, I can still seek to bless you. Okay? You know, when we take a close look at the teachings and the authority of Jesus in our life as he calls us to follow, I hope you've seen through this whole series that his call to follow him takes on maybe some more clarity, maybe some more specificity as to what he's actually asking of us. To actually walk as Jesus walked. To actually live it out more than just saying, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. No, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. So, what does it mean to be a real follower of Jesus? Here you go, 5 weeks in 5 seconds. Right? The first thing he tells us is, you are good enough, but I won't leave you as you are. He says, but if you are going to follow me, I want your devotion to be undivided. With all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. I've got to be at the top of your list. But understand, it's also going to mean you're going to carry a cross around. You're going to put to death those things about you that don't line up under the character of Jesus Christ. And you can't do that by yourself, so he gives you his Spirit to help you walk through that process. But he also expects you to have faith and imitate Jesus in his faith, a big faith in a big God. And he expects us to love like he loved. Now, with all of that said, the question is still there. Will you follow him? His question for us is still there. Will you follow me? I can't answer that question for you. That's for you to decide. Will you follow him today? Will you follow him tomorrow? Will you follow him the rest of your life? And I'll tell you this, if you have not yet entered into a relationship with Jesus Christ, let me tell you something we learned a couple of weeks ago. You are good enough just as you are. messed up, broken up, flawed, sinful. Because the reality is, even after those of us who have chosen to follow Jesus, guess what? We're still broken, messed up, flawed, and sinful. But we're working on it. We're carrying our crosses. We're following Jesus, and we're putting that stuff to death. But I would tell you that today, He invites you to follow Him just as you are, and you can. Or maybe you need the prayers of this church to follow Him better. Whatever you need, let us know as we stand, as we sing. Okay.